Like you know what you're doing. Hi, folks. Hi, can everyone hear me? Hi, wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us for this event celebrating Diana Kapp and Heather White's books, Girls Who Green the World and One Green Thing. Let's hear it for them. We are joined as well by none other than Chris Colin, who's our interlocutor this evening. Give it up for Chris. Fantastic. So I usually have a lot of business to tell you, but I'm not going to do that tonight. Instead, I'm going to narrow it down to just a little bit of business that I think is going to be relevant to this crowd in particular. So on Saturday, we have not this coming Saturday, following Saturday, April 30th is Independent Bookstore Day, which is our biggest day of the year. And we're going to have a lot of festivities that day, but the one that I'm maybe most excited about, don't tell the other festivities, but the one I'm most excited about is our Books on the Garden inaugural event, which is Green Apple's collaboration with the San Francisco Botanical Garden. So we've started a year-long event series with them. Next Saturday is our first one. It happens to be a kids' story hour with local author Emma Bland Smith, who's really great. She wrote Plod, she wrote Journey, and she also wrote The Gardener of Alcatraz, which is a true story, and now a picture book that you can pick up at our Books on the Garden event next Saturday, April 30th. But we're going to have a whole event calendar, of events taking place at the San Francisco Botanical Garden, outdoors, really beautiful. So do keep an eye on that in the future. I'm really excited about it. And I also want to draw your attention to our friends at Sustainabar, which are at the back table over here. Hi, Sustainabar folks. Yay, Sustainabar creates sustainable shampoo, soap, any other kinds of body products. And what's really cool is that the founders of Sustainabar also happen to be featured in Diana's book. So they're here. I would encourage you to support them. They make not only good looking, but support you. Not only good looking, but good smelling and sustainable products. So I would encourage you to check out their table at some point this evening. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the folks joining us this evening. First, we have Chris Colin right over here on my right, whose writing has appeared in New York Times Magazine, Wired, Smithsonian, Best American Science and Nature Writing, among many others. He co-wrote This Is Camino, which was nominated for a James Beard Award, and he is the author of What to Talk About, What Really Happened to the Class of '93, and Off the Day the Internet Died. He lives here in San Francisco. Give it up for Chris Colin. Next, I'd like to introduce Diana Kapp, who is right next to me here. She's a business journalist with an MBA from Stanford University, who has written about education and entrepreneurism for most major media outlets. She is also the author of Girls Who Run the World, and most recently, and one of the reasons we're here tonight, Girls Who Green the World. Please give it up for Diana Kapp. And last but certainly not least, Heather White is the founder of One Green Thing. White's 20+ years of service include being a litigator at a prominent Nashville law firm, working for Al Gore's 2000 presidential campaign, and then as a recount attorney, advising a progressive U.S. senator on energy and environmental policy, and many others, including serving as an adjunct law professor at Georgetown University Law Center, running an environmental health watchdog in Washington, D.C., and leading the nonprofit partner to Yellowstone National Park. She is a frequent spokesperson on environmental issues and has been featured on CBS, PBS, NBC, and quoted in Washington Post, New York Times, and The Guardian. She's also the author of One Green Thing, which is the other reason we're here tonight. So please give it up for Heather White.
Can you all hear me in the way back in the Sustainabar region? Okay. Nice to be here with you both. It's so nice when someone finally takes the time to put on soda cap chainmail. It's so rare. I can't tell you how rare it is. I thought we would start with a couple short readings. And Heather, I'm going to pick on you first. But before you each read, why don't you just say just a little bit about what this book is that you're reading from?
Great. So this book is actually a self-help book for climate action. I wrote it because so many people know that the issue is real and it's overwhelming and they're not really sure where to start.
Great.
Do you want me?
No, you, yeah.
Read.
Yeah,
Now
now you read.
Yeah. I am the first time author, as you may figure out. This is from chapter 15. Understand that you are what you eat. Rethink food to fuel body, mind, spirit, and planet. Whenever I'd visit my maternal grandfather, he'd make me an apple pie from scratch. My grandpa would pick apples from his small orchard and slice them up. He'd roll out the crust dough by hand, lay it in the pie pan, and sprinkle sugar and cinnamon on top. As a kid, I didn't think much about this experience, but his apple pie was always delicious. Then one day, at least 25 years later, I was apple picking with my family in an orchard in Winchester, Virginia. I was a super busy mom, relishing time away from my high-pressure job to unwind in the country. We were laughing, filling our baskets with bright pink and crimson apples, and enjoying the crisp air that signaled autumn was near. As I checked into the old-timey orchard store to weigh our harvest, I smelled the apple pies baking. A flood of images came back to me. I excused myself and found a bench to sit down because I was overcome by loving, tender memories. One particular revelation took my breath away. My grandpa had Parkinson's disease and a significant tremor. Most mornings it took him an hour to get dressed because buttoning his shirt was so difficult. Baking an apple pie must have taken him hours of intense concentration and likely frustration when his hands wouldn't cooperate. Until that moment in the Apple store, decades after he passed away, I'd never thought about how much gentleness, focus, and care had gone into that simple act. The pie I took for granted wasn't merely a dessert. It was a profound gesture of family, kindness, and service. Waves of extreme gratitude shook me. And then I asked, have you ever had a moment of breathtaking gratitude?
Thank you. So I think we'll pause there. Everyone remember that moment, and we'll switch over to Channel Diana.
Okay.
And I'd like to have you describe the book a little bit and read a selection, and then we'll sort of pull back.
Okay. So Girls Who Green the World is my second book, and it's a similar theme, which is I'm looking to inspire young people, and particularly young girls and women, to find their dreams, their biggest possibilities, believe that they can do whatever they want, because we need them to use their big brain power to solve all the big world problems that we have. And I think far too few see themselves represented. We have a lot of heroes of yesteryear where we learned about Amelia Earhart and Marie Curie, but there's a lot of modern day heroes that are out there waiting for girls to look up to them. And I'm just really moved by watching young people find their path. It was not easy for me. And so that's something I'd love to participate in. And I'll read, this is kind of a serious section, so we're getting to this early in the night, but I'm going to read about a woman named Catherine Coleman Flowers. And it was exciting. My husband and daughter and my daughter's best friend, Ariel, recently took a trip to Alabama and the South, sort of a civil rights trip, and they actually got to go and meet with Catherine. So I haven't met her in person, but she's actually a real hero of mine. And she recently won a MacArthur Genius Grant. Catherine Flowers has taken on the stuff that stinks. So get ready for a messy story here. Sometime today, nature will call, and if you happen to be at school, you'll probably scroll on your phone as you spend a few minutes in a graffiti scribbled stall. Afterward, you will flush the toilet will grumble and swirl, and all will happily disappear. The waste will then flow through buried pipes to the local wastewater treatment plant. There, the solids and liquids separate, added chemicals kill the viruses and bacteria, the liquids seep into the ground, and the sludge that won't break down goes to a landfill or facility to become fuel or fertilizer. No fuss, no muss. Well, some people do not get to just flush and forget. Catherine Flowers works for those people. Get this. Here in the richest nation on earth, where we sequence DNA and blast rockets to Mars, we can't manage to guarantee this simple dignity. Catherine, for 20 years, has been agitating for Alabamans who are literally living in their own human waste. Living in places with no nearby treatment plant, in some cases because the land was once enslaved people's territory and so was never officially incorporated. Sometimes the home is just too remote. A backyard septic tank can solve the problem, except that these tanks are totally unaffordable for some people. So the flies come and the disease and terrible shame. In Lowndes County, Alabama, where Catherine grew up, toilet waste pours out of straight pipes into people's yards, forming above ground cesspools out back. Clumps of sopped toilet paper cling where yard toys should be. Sometimes the sewage backs up in the pipes inside, reappearing later in sinks and tubs. Anything but flushed and forgotten. A quiet force who these days says she is too busy even for her houseplants. Catherine grew up in a concrete block house smack on the route of the famous 1965 Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. Lowndes was a county where not a single Black person was registered to vote, despite being majority of the population. Catherine's location and this history have everything to do with where her life has led her.
Thank you. I want to get into that in more detail, but why don't we first pull back? I'd really like to hear how each of you came to these books. I'm not going to ask why you wrote these books. I think we all know why these books need to be written. I'm curious about what it was that sort of got you. What was there an event or a moment or a thought that pushed you to do it when it did?
I definitely have a moment that pushed me to write the book. I'm a lawyer. I love writing. You know, we all think of ourselves as writers. And so it's something that I had thought about, but it wasn't until 2019 when my older daughter was a freshman in high school in Bozeman High, and she asked to participate in the Greta Thunberg inspired climate strike. And I'm an environmentalist. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I said to her, of course, you know, I'd be happy for you to do that, but it's supposed to rain. And thunderstorms are pretty uncommon in Bozeman. And she had a really heavy backpack and a trumpet. For those of you who have teenagers, you know, they carry a lot of stuff with them, even though they have teeny phones, they have all this stuff. And so I said, you know what I'll do is I'll just pick you up and I'll drive you to the protest site. And that didn't go over well. She was so appalled that I would first try to pick her up for a walkout. She was like, Mom, it is a walkout, not cool to have your parents pick you up. And secondly, you're going to drive me in your car to a climate strike. And then in that moment, she just said, Mom, where is Gen X? Where are baby boomers? I hear all of this praise about Generation Z, about Greta Thunberg, about all these young activists and how wonderful we are. You cannot leave this crisis all on our shoulders. And she started crying and she started saying, what are you doing? And what was so shocking to me, and as Chris knows, not only do I have 20 years experience in environmental advocacy, my husband does grizzly bear conservation in Montana. And he's done all kinds of work. So this is my career. And so I knew two things, Chris, is that I wanted to write, one, to really dive into the mental health impacts of the climate crisis and learn more about how young people are feeling about the future that they're inheriting. And the second is that I needed to create an invitation for more people to get involved in this movement because it is the biggest challenge of our time. So that's the moment where it came clear to me.
Okay, all right.
I didn't have a moment. I got into these books initially because I have this daughter, Emma, who's 12 at the time I started writing my first book. And she popped out of the womb, I always say, with her hands on her hips, and she's issuing orders every which way. And I kind of wondered, you know, whether the world was going to be ready for a kid like this. So that got me on the track of thinking about role models for young people. And then, interestingly, 2 weeks before that book came out, the Forbes list published America's 100 most innovative leaders with 99 men and women. it was great for a hook for launching the book.
Wait, what year was that?
That was 2019.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah.
And so again, I've taken a cue from my kids and they're holding me to account. And I have 3 kids who are really angry about the climate. They're angry at my husband and I for our lifestyle. They're sad and they're scared. And it is truly the biggest thing on their minds at all times. My son he took the train across the country back to college in New Haven, Connecticut. He barely drives. He looks askance at you if we're going to take 2 cars anywhere. And he's right. And it's been difficult to live with that and kind of reckon you can't be perfect. And I am so not exemplary. Like, I'm just learning all of this, but I do believe it is the issue of our time. And I also believe that the narrative that has formed around climate, especially for young people, is so negative that they're cynical, and it just leads to sort of it's a sense of like inevitability, like there's literally nothing to be done, which then becomes kind of an excuse for inaction. And so I really want to see if we can spotlight all the progress we're making, because actually there's a lot of really positive, cool advance that's happened, whether it's, the plunging cost of wind and solar. It's come down 80% in a decade. We have GM that's now about to stop producing gas-powered cars. And then this is an entire book full of people doing kind of experimental stuff on the edge, whether it's trying to reduce waste in food through really creative ways or come up with alternatives for plastic. And these stories, you see people, most of them, one woman says, when I started my business, I knew nothing about clean beauty. I knew nothing about sales. I knew nothing about nothing, but they do it. And now that woman has a business that's, cranking, worth millions of dollars. And she's, arguing for legislation in front of the US Senate about cleaning up our cosmetic products. So there's really a lot that can be done. So I think that's why I wrote the book.
You talk about that sense of overwhelm and paralysis that happens. I feel like that's the sort of signal schism right now that hangs over in the climate conversation, which is, on the one hand, we finally have gotten our arms around how the level of systemic change that needs to happen to change things. On the other hand, we know that we can't give up as individuals. So I'm just wondering how you all, as having given this much thought to it, how do you navigate that sort of schism?
One of the things I talk about this a lot at home, and for example, my older daughter recently reshared something on social media, and it was an image of a oil spill in Nigeria, and she shared skipping the straw, doing my part, like completely sarcastic, right? And so we had to have this big conversation. I mean, you're 16 years old, you live in Bozeman, Montana. Are you going to call the embassy in Nigeria? Like, what are you actually going to be doing? Are you going to go to the United Nations Environment Program? Even if you do, what do you do now? Skipping the straw is an important action to take. And here's why it is. It's because of a culture shift. And our individual action creates the culture change that we need for these big policy solutions to work. And because of all these people that are saying, no to single-use plastic, being more mindful, we now have an announcement just last month that there will be an international treaty dealing with plastic pollution. So that is the reason. It's not necessarily as much about your math, although the math does matter in aggregate, the individual actions do matter. It's more about this culture shift. And I think that's one of the things we keep talking about.
I mean, I think I struggle a lot with this issue. I mean, even the media that I'm getting about the book that's calling me an eco activist, and, wondering what my kids will think about that, and recognizing that all these little changes that I'm promoting, or these businesses that are like going to dye blue jeans in a different way, or that are going to make, glitter out of eucalyptus leaves instead of out of plastic, are those really going to move the needle when there's only one needle that matters, and that's when you've got to get to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels and nothing else really matters. But I agree that it's what we need to do is change the way we live, and we need to start consuming less. No matter what you look at, what the problem is, that is the root problem. That we're living on this planet that has gone from 760 million people to 7.6 billion people in a very short period of time. And there's just a limited number of resources. And we've become a society that's, we treat our clothes like disposables. We basically keep clothes for, on average, 6 months. That's the average in America. Each American throws out 80 pounds of clothes every year. So those things really add up. And I heard a great statistic about food. Food waste is some place where we can make a huge change, and also moving off meat. So if we all in America gave up one hamburger a week, every American, it would be equivalent to taking 10 million cars off the roads in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's significant.
Yeah.
So skip your burger.
Tell us more stuff. Tell me, I want to know more things that you learned over the course of doing your books, and things that might have changed your thinking about climate.
So for me, a couple things. One comes to mind is a lot of times when we're talking about climate action and we're talking about individual action, we're talking about taking away things. And sometimes people don't want to talk to you when you're just like, I'm taking away your meat. Although, of course, we need a plant-based diet. We know that for health reasons. And of course, that's better for the planet too. It's a taking away. When in fact, and this is true in Diana's book and all the stories she tells, it's true in my book too, what we can build together is so exciting. A clean energy future, those jobs with clean energy, this idea of a regenerative future. I don't put this in this book, but as part of my research, I started diving into this concept of solar punk, this idea of bringing artists together with architects, with engineers to just start literally envisioning what could that greener future look like. And that's one of the exercises I have in the book. So when I say it's a self-help book, I really mean you don't have to do all the work, I promise. But I mean, there's a visualization exercise where I ask you, and this relates to the passage that I read, I ask you to think of 3 people that have created opportunities for you to have a better life that are related to you and not on this planet anymore. So I ask you to think about your ancestors. And if you don't know much about your family history, I ask you to think about someone who you did not know who created an amazing opportunity for you. Then
Can you give an example?
For me, and of course my kids are named after them, see, they're named Katie and Susan. For me, it's Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, because I want to participate in democracy. They didn't know me, but they intentionally worked really hard. So I, person they didn't know in the future, could have a better life. And I have a better life, unquestionably. Like I have a better life because of their advocacy. I also did not expect to write about my grandparents as much as I do in a book about climate action. And so this story about the apple pie really surprised me as I was pulling this together. And the reason I think it's important is that I not only ask you to think about what 2050 could look like, what could this positive world that we're creating look like, I ask you to envision sitting down with a teenager that you're related to. And I ask you, what are they going to thank you for? What are they going to wish you had known? And you're the ancestor. And I think this idea of long-term thinking, cathedral thinking, that's another thing that I researched in the book, this idea of how do you want to pay it forward? What is your legacy is an important starting point in the conversation about climate action, and may be an opportunity for us to break through a lot of the political rancor that we have about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you guys a story that I learned in the beginning of the research for the book. And it's a story that ends up opening the book. And it's a really important story to know. And I'm telling it to all the audiences that I go to talk to. So in the mid-'80s, the environmental issue that everyone was panicked about was the ozone hole. And it was disappearing each year, but then it would return in springtime. And every year it was growing ever larger, and it was over Antarctica. And in 1986, a meeting of atmospheric scientists came together in Boulder, and they were floating some new ideas about what might be causing the ozone to be opening in this way. And a woman named Susan Solomon, who at the time was the only woman in the room, and she was a very young scientist, she floated her idea that it was that the polar clouds were giving the chemicals a place to sit down, and when they sat on the clouds, the chemical reaction could happen. And that had never been thought about, and she was completely laughed out of the room. But they were so worried about what was happening that they wanted to send a mission to Antarctica. And this woman, Susan, volunteers to go. No one else volunteered. She lands there with 16,000 pounds of equipment. She's got a team of 15. She spends most of the time sitting on the roof of the McMurdo Research Station. It's generally minus 40 degrees because it's nighttime. And she has sawed a hole in the roof. She's got a spectrograph, and she's letting moonlight come in through the hole, in through a prism, and then she's measuring the light and color to understand what is in the atmosphere. And what she finds is chlorine levels 100 times normal. And she puts that news out on the wires. And it was such an amazing moment of the world coming together. There was a meeting, a summit called in Montreal, and it produced the Montreal Protocol. And that was the first and only time in history that the whole world has come together. Every nation signed on to the treaty. And now we've banned chlorofluorocarbons, which is it's the chemical in spray cans and hairspray. And it is a true success story. And there are other success stories that I think we don't know. And I think it's just a great story to kind of open with when you talk to a group of young people who maybe could imagine then there is a way, and it's not something that is absolutely impossible. It's more complicated, obviously, what we're facing today. And that was like something that I actually been speaking to Susan Solomon a little bit and asking her, and she says that it's, when you have a practical solution, that's when something can happen. And so in that case, there was like an easy alternative that we could use to replace. And so that's why she's very hot on the prices of alternative energy coming down so much, because once we have a practical solution, then that is going to really help us move forward.
I bet there's like 4 minimum books about Amelia Earhart in this store. Why have I not heard her name until your book?
I hadn't heard her name, and I was, when I do these books, I try to figure out who to write about, and I ask people, well-known people in the space, to tell me who they would put in their books. And her name came up, and I started reading about her, and I'm just incredibly moved by her, and she's a really cool woman. And she's now she's a professor at MIT. But she's coming out with a book on 5 different areas that she thinks that we've solved. Lead paint, smog. We've made incredible progress on smog. And what else she's got, but anyway, that's how her mind is thinking.
Well, and picking up on that whole train, I think it's important for us to be intentional in what we share with our kids. We forget. I'm an environmental lawyer. I've known about the Montreal Protocol. I was in high school in 1987. I even remember it then, but I've never talked to my kids about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course they're going to take it for granted. Not only all the changes I've seen in civil rights and social rights, and obviously we have a huge, huge, huge way to go, but we have seen tremendous amount of progress. And we forget to tell those stories.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's important to have this moment of reflection and be intentional, and to have amazing people like Diana lifting those stories out and digging, because we need to tell them.
Yeah. Can you tell us some more things that give you hope?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think we all know, probably most people here, like, it depends what audience I'm in, but in San Francisco, I'm going to Athens, Tennessee in a couple of weeks. It might be a different conversation, but I think here, everyone knows we have the technology. You know, renewable energy, you talked about the price coming down. I mean, we're not at scale yet, but we're really close. We know that we have the ability to electrify everything with clean energy. We know we need to stop clear cutting, and especially in the global south for agriculture primarily. We know what the solutions are. What is missing is the political will. And in my view, what gives me hope is young people. I'm going to tell you some really depressing statistics
Okay.
and then tell you it gives me hope. And that is, 10,000 young people were surveyed last year across the globe, ages 16 through 25. And 1 out of 4, this is not going to sound hopeful, 1 out of 4 did not want to have children because they're so worried about the climate crisis. 47% said climate anxiety was interfering with their daily life. Last week, 4-H, and for those of you who are familiar with 4-H, it is an agricultural club across the country. 4-H did a survey of 1,500 students. 85% were worried that we weren't doing enough about climate change and that it was going to disrupt their daily life and their future. And the reason I say that gives me hope is that when people tend to think about 4-H, they think about a different political background. And so what I'm going to say is that Generation Z is upset and as worried as worried as they are about the future. They know climate change is real. They know we have the solutions and they want to see action. So that gives me hope. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from my book, and I try to encourage people to do, is to create space to listen to kids, because there are a lot of resources out there that how to talk to your kids about climate change. They know. And all that social media, we think it's about who's wearing what. Like Chris's outfit's really cute. And oh my gosh, did you check out Diana's chainmail? That's so amazing. But a lot of it is the pain in the world. They are sharing the headlines, whether it's the Ukraine or the climate crisis, they're hyper aware of that. And so creating that space and knowing that they know, I think gives me a lot of hope because they just need our help.
Yeah. Thank you about the outfit, by the way.
It is great.
Well, I was going to ask you both. I mean, I do have this sense that that generation is switched on and they know what's going on and they don't need to be convinced like other people do. But I don't know, am I going to find out in 20 years that there's just as many Tucker Carlsons in their generation as there are in ours?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I really don't. I have a good story, which is the other weekend I went to a pitch competition for tween girls who are part of this great program called Girls Crushing It. And they spend 2 months together and they go through the process of brainstorming a business idea and then developing their pitch and then, iterating and pivoting, and they learn all these terms. And they were getting the opportunity to pitch their businesses to Title IX, which is one of the original women's sportswear businesses based in Berkeley, run by this wonderful woman. And each of the sets of kids, like maybe 8 sets of kids, had won the opportunity to come and speak at this and try. And the winners were going to get to sell their products in the Title IX stores, plus get a $500 check. So they were really psyched to try to win. And they got up there, and there hadn't been any brief about like what type of business it had to be, but every one of the businesses, the kids are saying like, I made these dog toys out of upcycled blue jeans, and I have minimal packaging, and I have sourced my materials responsibly, for the soaps that they were doing, and talking about how they're going to get things made in the United States because we can track where they come from. So I was so heartened because it's baked into how they think.
Yeah.
It's like they don't know any other way of thinking about the world. And I really think about my kids that way. Like they are living in a very different world where these things are just unconscious to them, this way of thinking. And so
I agree 100%. That's
Mhm.
definitely been my experience too.
Okay. I'm so sorry to say I'm getting the signal that we should pivot to the Q&A now.
Sure, absolutely. Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
So one of the things about the book that I just wanted to point out is that I have an assessment in this book, kind of like a Myers-Briggs.
I was going to ask you to talk about
Yeah,
that.
okay, kind of like a Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram or Strength Finders. And I said that I wanted to create an invitation for more people to get involved in the climate action. So you take a brief assessment about who are you in service? How do you show up for the people that you love? And then I match you, like any good wellness plan would, or fitness plan would, with a 21-day plan where you do a one green thing each day as this idea of a daily practice of sustainability that can create that culture shift that we need. And I realized that I didn't mention that part of the book, but that's the first part of the book. And I have stories of people matching the 7 different profiles of folks in service.
Yeah. No, I love, you don't have to sort of like wake up in the morning and be like, Jesus, I'm overwhelmed. There's specific
Yeah.
things you can do. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
She dedicates the book to her kids and her husband, but she calls them like my spark, my wonk, like those are the different names. It's really cute.
Folks, I have so many more questions I want to get to because these books are awesome and they're so full of really, really wonderful information and thoughts and thinking that I think we are all overdue for. But I will not ask them. I'll let you all ask any questions you have. I've been talking long enough here. But I just want to say before I hand over the floor, both of these books are just wonderful. I hope you buy them and buy them for loved ones too, because I think they're exactly what we need right now. So thank you for being here in the first place. Questions? I just did a whole big preamble about how it's your turn.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of people that were possibilities narrowed it down, or did you find yourself having to struggle to find women, who'd be inspirational journals?
Will you repeat the question?
So the question was, did you have to struggle to find enough women that kind of fit the criteria of like very innovative and in this space? And the answer is no, you don't have to struggle at all. There are so many women out there. I found one really great strategy, which is talking to social impact investors. And there's a couple of great ones here in San Francisco, like the Emerson Collective and Draper, Richards, Kaplan. And so they're all over the place seeking out very early stage ideas in many, many categories. And so I usually start there. And then I, ask those people who they know. And I mean, there's, first of all, females are running the environmental movement. I've been going around to the high schools and meeting with the green teams, and they are 90% females. And that's the word that everyone's been talking about, how it's just rising up, women being really interested in this issue, great majority of majors in environmental studies. So that's exciting. That's encouraging.
Yeah, I'll add to that too, because in my book, with each of the 7 profiles, I have 3 eco heroes, just brief stories. There's 21 and 19 are women. So I think that's absolutely right, that this movement, there's so many women that are really involved and passionate.
Yeah.
That's kind of on that same topic, thinking about women in leadership in the environmental movement as a positive thing, obviously, but I think part of that reason is that the economy writ large is still so patriarchal. And so some of the basic tenets of the current capitalist system are based on kind of competition and one man at the top kind of models that are not resonant for women. And so I'm curious how you think about like these leaders having an impact at that systemic level and what it will take for, is it enough to have women in leadership? Is that going to change that system, or are we going to need to either, bring men along? You know what I mean? Like how do we, or what have you learned through your research, I guess is what I want to ask about the limits of how like women in leadership struggling against systems that are really working against sort of the care economy or the clean economy or the different ways of thinking about even growth within our economy. Curious if that came up and how you think about that.
It came up tangentially for me, again, because my idea was who are you is very individualized, the book itself. But one of the eco heroes that I profile is a woman named Robin O'Brien, who would never consider herself an environmentalist, who got her MBA at Rice and was working as a food analyst when her kids had horrible egg allergies. And then she started diving in as a food analyst into chemicals that are in our food supply, and then started learning more and more about agriculture, and then finding that what's sold in Europe and what's sold here in the United States, the same company, they're manufacturing much more toxic products here. And that just led her on this whole path. Now she is really focused on investing in women in agriculture, but in regenerative agriculture. So farmers who want to make the transition eventually toward organic with a focus on soil health. So she started like on a desk focusing on, commodities, different futures, and then food companies, and now is really focused on this big solution and trying to bring more women, but through capital and philanthropy, to make a transition at scale, and then matching them with big companies to get those at scale. So that's a great complex question. It sounds like that'd be a fun book for us to collaborate on.
I'd love to know what you think about this, because
Mhm.
Regan, you've spent a lot of time around in this space, but it's, I mean, obviously that's like the problem of our time, is how we're gonna face down sort of these big, huge companies that run in old ways. And I don't think it has anything to do with gender. I think those are just entrenched, and it's gonna cause us to have to really break down some, solid structures, and that's very difficult to do. So I don't even think of that as a gender thing. I think of that as that's the problem we're facing, is we have ways of doing things that are very entrenched, and they have a lot of money and power over politics. I think the number one thing I would say is we all have to get political, because even though individual actions matter, of course, the big levers are policy changes, and those happen through political pressure. And we need to get active for the midterm elections and locally, because look at all the things that are great happening in California for cars and reducing emissions. And so things do happen, but I definitely think registering voters, going to work for the midterm elections, funding climate friendly candidates, like those are some of our biggest, most important things that we need to be doing right now.
And I would say, as someone who lives in Montana and was a recount attorney, yes, 1,000 times yes. But I'll also say, I have a member of Congress that does not share any of my political values at all. But I love calling him. I call him regularly. I send him emails, and it's really important for me and to do that, not because it's going to change his vote. It will not change his vote, 100%. I know that, but because I need to remind him that the state I'm in is not a monolith. He doesn't reflect all of us, and he needs to be reminded, because those are my taxpayers' dollars too, that we have a different view. And so one of the things I hear a lot from where I live, which is often referred to as flyover country, is, well, what do I like? Really, how do you keep doing it? How do you keep doing it? How do you keep having your fire in the belly? And the reason I keep doing it, the reason I'm still in the fight, the reason I know democracy is not a spectator sport, is because it is the biggest challenge of our time. We cannot give up. I do want to be a good ancestor. I do, want to create opportunities for the people I love that I have never met. And I think all of us can have an important role in that.
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, I really appreciate the comment you made, because that's kind of my concern too, is that you can have the public sector and the policy driven change, but if it's not happening in private enterprise, which is a very patriarchal system, then I worry about it really changing. And it's wonderful to see young women and girls leading this initiative. The guys got to get on board, or have a lot of faith that it will ultimately be solved related into the planet. So my question really is, in your research, are there roles within the private sector, like a chief green officer, or, because I'm not aware of this, and I would say 4 years ago, I've been working for 30 years in corporate businesses, and I would have never thought I'd see the day where there were diversity and inclusion officers. But wow, that's huge. So are there environmental leader roles at the C level in private business?
I mean, absolutely.
Can I piggyback onto that?
Yeah.
Because I want to know that too, and I also want to know how you separate the good ones from the greenwashers.
Right.
Oh, good.
I didn't even know the term greenwashing when I started this book, and that's something that I had to be schooled on by my kids. And it is so tricky because, you know, think about the apparel companies that are promoting themselves as with their little tag, cute tag saying sustainably made. And, you know, the zero emissions that they're reporting are only in their offices. They're not even talking about their factories. And they have these really, you know, sneaky ways of how they report things. But I'm such a believer in the power of technology, and they always start small and then they grow. And the fact that small companies are coming up and doing new forms of solar, and they're, you know, working on new batteries, and Kathy Zoy is putting in electric powered chargers, you know, all across America. Those will cause us to move forward. Those will cause other businesses to come in the space. The prices will come down. I mean, I believe in technology and capitalism, and we're going to do this through economic measures. I mean, that's how change has to happen just as much as through policy. So I'm excited when I see all these women in STEM, you know, bioengineering new ways to dye blue jeans, and, you know, creating new meats out of exhaled carbon dioxide that's going to feed the planet. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And no, I don't think Lisa Dyson is going to change the planet, but she's taking the steps that are going to help more people come into the field, and that's what's going to advance it.
I realized, so when I was in law school, there were people who wanted to answer questions, even though, you know, it's a Socratic method and you're just called on, and we call them ooh-oohs. And I realized I was just being an ooh.
Oh, that's okay.
I was like, ooh, 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 ooh. No, pick me. No, I want to answer. Yes, there are huge opportunities in corporate America and sustainability, and they're only increasing. Project Drawdown, great nonprofit. Jamie Alexander has a wonderful quote, which I cite to the book, and that is, every job is a climate job. And that's the reality that we're going to experience in the next 5 years. The reason that everyone is going to come on board is unfortunately what you've already experienced here in 2020, when the skies turned orange in San Francisco. I live in Montana. Wildfires are becoming more intense every year. If you're in New York and you saw the subways flood, if you live in Germany, if you're in, you know, you name the country, we've all experienced, and we're going to experience more. So we can't ignore it. It's just going to happen. But there are incredible opportunities. So if you're an artist, if you're an architect, if you're a teacher, if you're a technologist, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a finance analyst, if you're a writer, there are all kinds of opportunities for you to get involved. And it's just growing every day. So I just want to be really clear that the key question is this whole idea of the truth squad. Like, how do you really know that someone's not greenwashing? And it's a challenge, you know, because on one level, it's like you get to a point where like, oh my gosh, I can't even try. Why even try? Because I'm going to be criticized. You know, I'm sorry, I chose the wrong, you know, brand of laundry detergent. Oh my gosh, you know, so we have to break through this idea of perfectionism, but we still need to hold these companies accountable. And it's a very complex question. Again, another great book we might write about greenwashing and how to have that lens.
We need to fund the press and reporters.
Yes,
to find out
absolutely.
about greenwashing.
A lot has been said, obviously, about social media. There's dollars on one side and people who have their own facts on the other side. What role does social media play in the climate fight?
Oh, wow. Great question about the role. The role of climate disinformation in social media is intense. I'm going to tell you all, it might seem a little self-serving, but it's true. I'm the #2 new release in climate action books. And the #1 is from the Heartland Institute, which is a pamphlet. It's $9.99, which you'll notice is much cheaper than my book. And it is filled with misinformation about what the climate crisis is. It's the #1 book in climate action on Earth Day. And they do this every year it's a campaign that they do it, and it's marketed to educators. So this is a huge issue that we have with it's a huge issue. And that's a pamphlet. That's not even social media or ads. Huge issue that we have. But the reality is these kids know, and they know because they've experienced the extreme weather. They know. The older generations, and this is where we need to create space for kids to be heard, I think have an opportunity to listen and to hear about the future. But it's a huge challenge that we have, especially when we're talking about the need for political action and culture change. But the truth is going to be really hard to ignore, and it is in many places already.
But the counter to that is that the social media is what's allowing these young people all around the world to connect up with each other, and they are, becoming a real force. There was this great piece in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, and it was titled "Okay Doomer," and it was kind of a play on "Okay Boomer," and it was kind of a play. It was a play on "Okay Boomer." And it was talking about these TikTokers who are fed up with all the gloom and doom, and they want to, change things for the positive, and they are becoming a big group on TikTok with a big following. It's called Eco Talk. You should check it out because it's unbelievable what's going on in these corners of social media and TikTok, and how many young people around the world are finding each other and sharing information and turning out to conferences and getting really pumped up to get political. So you have to do this stuff in community. It's so big and overwhelming. And the only way to do it is to find your people and get together and make circles. And that's, something that's been really successful.
It's almost as though the status quo wants us to feel defeated and not change the status quo.
Huh.
Did you know that the whole idea of your carbon footprint is an idea that was invented by the fossil fuel companies to have us all chasing our tail and counting our little calories, when actually it doesn't make a damn bit of difference, most of those things.
And I'll just add to that, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book. Okay, wait, if my carbon footprint doesn't really matter, why are you asking me to have a daily practice of sustainability? And again, it's that culture change.
Mhm.
It's if you start counting your carbon, it's like losing 0.2 pounds every 6 months. I'll tell you, that's not very motivating. And so what you need to do is just think about that practice though. And in the practice can bring a lot more of, and this is a word that we haven't used, but I think it's important. It can bring joy into your life. And I think that's important for us to understand, is that this action and knowing that you're trying to make a difference can bring a lot of joy.
Mhm.
Conscious, and I think I'm 16 and my parents will know that I'm very aggro about the water being turned off, and when I see something that clearly should not go in the compost, I'll roll my eyes and be like, ugh, there my parents go again. And I'm just wondering what do you think your books will with people like me who already have forward-looking views on the planet, how do you think
Well, I would hope what my book would do would help you take the next step and say, hey, I really care about these things, and I'm already a really conscious, savvy person about the environment, but how do I find my place to start to do something? And so maybe you can, research more about some area of this that actually interests you. Like maybe you got really interested in, we should be eating imperfect produce. We don't need to be throwing all of that away. So then maybe you could find for your family a grocery store that actually sells that. And then who knows, maybe someday you're going to intern for the imperfect food boxes, or you're going to work for the restaurant that just opened that's selling trash pies that's, made with ugly produce. And that's how you're going to learn the kind of skills and to be smart and savvy and go out in the world. And then you're going to join a company and you're going to say, hey, why are we doing it this way? And then it'll be thousands of people who you need to reform what they're throwing in the bin, not just your filthy mom and dad. You need to then get the company to be accountable for what they're doing with their waste or how much waste they're throwing out in their cafeteria. So I just think to me, it's entry points for young people to feel excited and get more information and follow their passions. Because there's so many ways to get involved in this. It's almost overwhelming to think about it. So you kind of have to just say, it's not the defining thing, but yeah, I am really interested in why we're wasting so much food, or why how could we eat less meat, and what are the alternatives, and are they affordable? And, anyway, what do you think of that?
That's great.
Well, I wrote my book with Gen Xers in mind.
which apparently is cool now. Like karate, Cobra Kai apparently is a big show on Netflix. But I have lots of references to things like parachute pants and growing up in the 80s. So I did not anticipate the interest that I had from young people. I really thought it was for your parents, I'm assuming are Gen Xers, to try to make sense of how can you hold space for young people and get involved. But what I found, and for the Gen Xers, you'll remember that the book has become almost like a choose your own adventure, but a choose your own adventure in how you want to show up in climate action. And so I've gotten a great reception from teenagers, not because I'm cool, because that's probably pretty obvious to the teenagers in the room and certainly obvious to my teenagers that I live with, but because they could start to see themselves in the movement and start thinking about their strengths and their interests and their talents and how it could be applied. So it became more of an action guide and a self-help book from them, not just something that I initially envisioned, which was like, hey, mom, dad, check this out. That's what I always envisioned.
I think the book that needs to be written is the one that describes what all these Gen X, Gen Z, boomers, I cannot keep them apart. I don't know. I don't even know what am I. What am I?
You're Gen X for sure. You're 100% Gen X. Yes. Do you all want me to tell? You went like 1997 Gen Z? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's land on an online question.
Great idea. Oh, great question. In what way do you think small but organized shareholders can influence big corporations? They can influence them radically. We just had here Reverend Sally Bingham, who unfortunately had to leave a little bit early. She's profiled in my book as a sage. She started Interfaith Power and Light, a group that's focused on the faith community and climate action. And she was talking about one of her colleagues who was a nun who would buy a small group of shares in Chevron and would go to meetings and just ask questions constantly and created a buzz and a campaign that way. So not just from PR perspective, but from governance perspective, we've seen this happen at universities across the country. The divest movement has been very substantial to get university endowments no longer to invest in fossil fuels. And in the book, I ask people to, you can have a conversation with your financial planner and say, I don't want to invest my 401k, 403b, whatever it is, in fossil fuels. You can make that decision yourself too, but those actions do matter.
All right, why don't we call it? I don't even need to tell you to buy these books. I'm so excited about these books, and I'm so grateful that both of you, Heather and Diana, were here tonight, and that you wrote these books. Like I said, I think they're just what we need, and I can't wait to see what you all do next.
I think this is the best bat mitzvah present.
Best 50th birthday present. 50th birthday present right here too. And I just want to say thank you so much to Diana. We've become friends, fast friends through this experience. It's been so fun, and we'll be in Memphis. If you have friends in Memphis, we'll be in Memphis May 12th at Novel Book. So.
Thanks to Green Apple for having us. Thank you all for coming out.